Welcome everyone, I'm Archit Tashadri. Thanks so much for watching WION World is One News. This is a special edition Straight Talk. Today we're going to be interviewing Agusto Montiel. He is the Venezuelan Ambassador to India. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time. Whenever we talk about Venezuela, we've been covering it extensively on the news. Unfortunately, there is a lot of negative press. We hear about the protests, the violence, but you're saying there's a different picture. Explain.
Well, the difference is that the violence is actually planned, financed, and present there in Venezuela every day by people who have been trained, financed, and prepared to create daily chaos in Venezuela, because violent opposition in the country of President Nicolás Maduro is trying to overthrow unconstitutionally, illegally, the government of President Maduro.
But what is the vested interest? Who is trying to benefit from this? You have some of these images.
Yes, definitely. Yes, I would like to show, for example, that the so-called peaceful protests in Venezuela are not such. These are, if we can see here, trained people with equipment and a bazooka. These are not peaceful by any means. Peaceful protests at all. And these people with the masks every day in Venezuela, they appear in the morning, in the afternoon, and these are not families who have the right to protest against any government like in any democratic country. And certainly Venezuela, as the United Nations, as UNESCO, and every international agency that has proved Venezuela, for example, with 100% literacy, is only one of 2 countries in Latin America that has that level. Venezuela was the first country to complete the Millennium Goals, social development goals, human development goals, in the decade of the 2000s, and in only 9 years, Venezuela was able to reach 100% literacy, reach 96% of water access, 96% of the population have access to water. ECLAC, which is the Economic Latin American Commission, has proved that in Latin America, Venezuela is the country with the least social inequality, and
compared to the rest of the South American nations.
That's right.
But you know, with regard to that, though, why is there seems to be some perhaps violence because of lack of food or humanitarian aid? Is that just something that is being put out by other media, perhaps?
Definitely.
To showcase that, or elaborate on that?
Venezuela is the country with the most powerful democratic dynamism in the whole of the region, because in Venezuela, opposition parties they reached almost 2/3 majority in the National Assembly in the elections of only 1.5 years ago. In December 2015, the opposition in Venezuela completed their aim to achieve majority in the National Assembly. So how can they say that there is no democracy in Venezuela? How can they say that in Venezuela there are no elections when we have had in Venezuela 21 elections in the last 18 years? And they are open, transparent elections, which even ex-President Jimmy Carter of the Carter Foundation has pressed how effective and transparent the elections in Venezuela are. So, in Venezuela, violent opposition, they accept elections when they win. But when the government wins, they don't accept elections. And they always have the same opinions, for example, as the government of, for example, the United States. Let's remember that Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world.
Right.
Proved and certified oil reserves. So the problem in Venezuela is not one of economic crisis. Venezuela has economic problems, yes, like Saudi Arabia, for example, or like every European country has had financial and economic crisis in the last 8 years and so on. But is that the reason why other countries should intervene, should interfere in internal matters, which is against international law, which is against the principles of the United Nations? In Venezuela, as we can see, there is no such a thing as peaceful protests. These are arranged,
horrific images,
planned, horrific images. Look at this. This is a policeman.
Being beaten up with...
And these are, all of these people are not families. These are trained, financed, well-equipped paramilitary personnel, which in the numbers of 300 to 2,000 in 7 municipalities of Venezuela. Only. The news that have gone around about Venezuela in flames, no, it's not true. This only happens in the municipalities governed by violent opposition parties.
What is the ultimate goal? What is the reason then that we're seeing
They
this
want to
disparity?
overthrow, they want to create an image to the world. And of course, sometimes we have to ask ourselves, why are there some news corporate, international news agencies that only portray these the images of the protests, but they don't show, why don't they show these pictures? For example, the burning of one young man like this, and this is in this can be looked at in the internet. Look at this, these are policemen being tied and tortured on a tree. These are the motorbikes,
right?
And they were ambushed. And this happens every day in Venezuela, but these pictures are not shown by the same news agencies, corporate news agencies. We show and say that in Venezuela there is humanitarian crisis, which there isn't. In Venezuela, there is better social status than in other Latin American countries. In Venezuela, we don't have, for example, journalists being killed. In other Latin American countries, so far in the year 2017, in just one country, I will not mention it, of course, there have been 17 journalists killed, and so last year, and massacred people. Look at this. Look at this. Well-equipped, burning
and you're saying none of this ever gets out in the media portrays a different picture.
Yes, and this is planned actions.
All right.
Trying to overthrow the government of Nicolas Maduro. This is what police find. Okay, of the many people dead, many of them have been by the use of metal
projectiles.
Projectiles used with homemade weapons. What, of course, these homemade weapons have been supplied.
All right.
Systematically, like this. Look at this.
Okay,
Systematically.
I also want to follow up with you
the point is this, that this happens every day. They destroy public and private property. They are destroying buses, public transport buses. They are destroying and burning hospitals. They are destroying ambulances. They are burning, like for example here, the National Institute of Nutrition. They have burned. They lynch police and National Guard, which in Venezuela, the police and the National Guard do not carry lethal weapons on the streets.
Okay.
It's against the Constitution.
All right, I want to follow up really quickly in the interest of time.
Yes.
Let's talk about the relationship of the United States with Venezuela, the era of the Barack Obama presidency and now with Donald Trump. We understand there is possibly the Trump administration is looking at sanctions at Venezuela. We understand many of the airlines have now cut back services because of that.
They have done sanctions against Venezuela like they did against Iraq. Let's remember, my dear friend, that in 2002, 2003, the same corporate news agencies which are taking these fake news to the world, fake news because they don't show this. For example, on May Day, millions of people supporting the government on the streets of Venezuela. Every day there are rallies, demonstrations of support to the government, for example.
Let's go back to that question about the U.S. What is their relationship? Has that changed with the Obama and the Trump administration?
Obama created a decree declaring Venezuela an extraordinary military threat to the security of the United States. They did that against Iraq, they did that against Libya, and they did that against every other country with oil that they want to control.
So it's a fight for oil, you're saying. It's a vested interest in oil.
If this, why don't these travel news agencies, why don't they show these images like today, for example, like last week, mothers on Mother's Day in May, mothers coming out with their children by the thousands, coming out on the streets against the violence perpetrated in Venezuela by paramilitary forces financed by non-governmental organizations that are financed by agencies, for example, from the United States. The same people of the opposition in Venezuela that are doing this on the streets of Venezuela, which are being seconded, and the international news agencies hide these facts. Why don't they publish this news? Why don't they publish? Why is it that countries like the United States sanction Supreme Court magistrates? Why do they sanction the Vice President of Venezuela? Why do they? Which sanctions? The international principles of the United Nations do not allow interference in matters of internal nature in other countries, do not allow the intervention of other countries in internal matters. Why are they creating this picture internationally? Because they want to overthrow the government of President Maduro, because the government of President Maduro is taking care of the natural wealth of Venezuela through a constitution which, like in every country, defends autonomy, defends independence, and uses oil for international cooperation. That's why Venezuela supplies 1/3 of the oil that India imports for the Indian industrial needs, for India's development. Venezuela is there supplying the oil.
What is the relationship between India and Venezuela in terms of that? How is that relationship changing?
We are the 4th oil supplier to India, and Venezuela has been supplying oil to India, India is the 3rd importer of Venezuelan oil. India's refineries refine Venezuelan extra heavy and heavy crude oil, which your refineries, among which is one of the largest refineries in the world, Jamnagar refinery, and others like, for example, Paradip and Mangalore are also. And ONGC is producing with Venezuela in the largest oil reserve in the world, which is the Hugo Chavez oil belt in Venezuela. ONGC and Indian Oil are producing with Venezuelan Oil Corporation oil there, like many other international multinational companies are producing there. But let's remember that since 18 years ago, when Venezuela created a new constitution, the government of Venezuela, with other governments in Latin America, have become independent, have become sovereign in an orchestra of international countries that can cooperate together. But there are countries, especially in the north, that want to use oil simply for domination. And we are not for that. We are for peaceful, multilateral,
more of a show of strength,
multipolarity. We are, and in that sense, for example, we are in support of Honorable Prime Minister Modi in looking for a multipolarity in the world. We need multipolar world so that the needs of the developing countries, the needs of every region of the world can be addressed, and not only the interests and the needs of what generally are called big powers, big military powers, empires, and so on. The country of Venezuela is a democratic country, and everything that I'm saying can be verified in the internet.
We appreciate your time. Unfortunately, we do not have more time, but thank you again for your perspective on all of that.
And if you invite your viewers to ask international news agencies to publish all the pictures about people supporting the government in Venezuela, they are making all these people invisible. Millions of people in Venezuela that want peace, that want resolution of conflicts through politics, through negotiations, through dialogue, and that want the Pope, and many ex-presidents are there. But the opposition in Venezuela, which always has the same arguments and the same discourse as the government of the United States, and that's why, by the way, last week, the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago went out on a press conference requiring and requesting the resignation of the Secretary General of the Organization of American States, because they are carrying out operations against Venezuela, violent operations against Venezuela, unconstitutional and illegal. In Venezuela,
certainly,
life is normal.
Certainly a lot of interesting things to talk about, a lot of hot button issues with Venezuela, but we appreciate your time. Agusto
Thank you very
Montiel,
much indeed.
Thank you so much, the Ambassador for Venezuela to India. We appreciate your time. Thank you for those inputs.
Thank you very much indeed.
And that does it for this edition of Straight Talk, talking to the Venezuelan Ambassador to India. I'm Archit Seshadri. Thanks so much for joining us.